Claudette's here, John's here, and Sarah's here, so we're complete with that. That's great. Greg is here. Thank you, Greg, for putting stuff up on the site. It was it was a good job, and it's been a challenge for us in the past. So welcome to the Complete Streets Advisory Committee meeting for February. First thing I want to do is introduce our newest member, Claudette Ford. Claudette joins us as a returning Kingston resident. You've been here about 3 or 4 years. Again, you grew up here.
Ulster County.
Okay.
Not Kingston, but Ulster County, yes.
Claudette lives in the city of Kingston. She comes from a public works background, so I have an affinity for her.
Yes.
She's a public works director in
Berkeley, Connecticut, Berkeley, California, and Oakland, California.
And now is retired.
Semi.
Quasi-retired.
Yeah. If I talk to Bob, I won't stay retired.
So we have someone who can help us with our public works issues, and I'm sure that'll be fun for the guys in public works. Glad to have you with us. She also is on the ARCAL board, and will help represent the people who have mobility challenges. Should we go around the table for Claudette's benefit so that everybody can introduce themselves? Brian?
I'm Brian Slack, Principal Transportation Planner for the Ulster County Transportation Council.
John Gross-Poland, involved with all the rail trails in the area, and veteran long-distance bicycle tour.
Bob Dennison, I'm the chair of the Complete Streets Advisory Council.
Yes.
Sarah White, member, committee member, council member.
Okay.
Greg Krupp, I work in the engineering department, and I'm the liaison for St. else.
Andy Turco-Levin, I am a realtor and longtime member of Complete Streets Advisory Council and former member of the Kingston Land Trust, did a lot of work on Kingston Greenland.
And I'm Sean Koester. I'm in the engineering department of the city as well, just here for a presentation today.
Okay. And because he loves to come and see us, right, Sean? I knew that. We have visitors. Should we go around the table and go around and find out who our visitors are?
Hey, I'm Havra. I lived in the city of Kingston for 2 years as a renter. Just found out today my closing date on a house.
Hey,
Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm just interested in learning more about how things work.
I'm David Wesley. I moved to Franklin Street in November. I'm a lawyer.
Lynn Woods, I'm a local journalist.
Hi, Laura Ricky. I know Bob Dennison and Claudette. How do you like that?
I didn't know I knew you.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So some of us are here from Woodstock. I'm on the Woodstock Town Board. We started a Complete Streets Committee in Woodstock several months ago, and we heard you guys are having a presentation. We'd like to learn what you learned because you might help us learn some stuff in Woodstock. Not as many sidewalks as you have, but we still have sidewalks.
82 miles, I think. We'll have to check. You'd know.
I'm Robin Collins, and I'm on the Complete Streets Committee in Woodstock, and we're hoping to learn some things so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Linda Lauer, Complete Streets, Woodstock, ditto.
Hi,
Tanya Garner, I live in Rondout, member of a few citizen groups.
Oh, Clark Richards, Kingston News, filming. For you to.
And da-da-da-da.
And Kristen. You're in the wrong place. It's okay. We just did introductions. It's okay. This is Kristen Wilson. She knows everything.
No, I don't know everything. But she makes it all happen.
She does. She does. So you have to stand maybe when they do their slideshow, but our old blind being around the corner. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Our tradition is to have public comment at the very beginning. I don't know if anybody has any public comment. If so, raise your hand. Make yourself known. Okay.
I guess I'll make a comment. Tanya Garment.
Yep.
I'm a little concerned about the signalization for the upcoming Broadway streetscape. I know this is pretty late in the plan. The plan was approved in August, and the RFP has gone out for the new, for the people who are going to construct it. But I'm really concerned that we are having actuated signalization for Broadway, and that the signalization is geared more towards the automobile than anything else. It's got The design speed is 30 miles an hour. That's the full speed limit. So if a car drives at 30 miles an hour, they'll be able to beat a few lights. That sort of coordinated signalization can be used to actually reward cars for going more like 20 miles an hour. It can also be used to give the light to bicycles through a few lights. And push buttons for pedestrians, I feel, is totally inappropriate for a Broadway. It's the corridor, it's the link between uptown and downtown. Hopefully it'll grow more and more, especially with the new Broadway streetscape. It's got a lot of things that are going to encourage more multimodal usage. But here we're asking pedestrians to get to the corner. If the light just changed for the vehicular traffic and they haven't pressed the button, they're going to have to wait through a whole cycle. I don't think many regular users of Broadway are going to be making the habit of waiting, but it's going to be timed for vehicular traffic and not for pedestrians unless they were able to press the button and are willing to wait. And I do feel it's unreasonable to ask them to have another disadvantage over the cars. The cars are already advantaged. And yes, drivers have an expectation, because they've been taught since the mid-century to that they've got all the rights. But maybe we need to do some more education for the drivers that it's not all about them.
It's also going to have a signalized interface to the bike lane.
They're going to have the ability to be in front of the vehicles, so the vehicles will have better visibility of the bikes, and there'll be something that detects them automatically if they're in that conflict zone, so they will be able to turn left before the vehicles can. But the pedestrians are not going to have any advantages in terms of the signalization.
You know, what we can do is we can, maybe we can have someone from the GPI talk to you about this, but
I spoke to somebody at GPI. I've got an 18-minute interview if anybody wants to listen to it, where I asked all my questions and confirmed the things that I was worried about.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we'll note your comment.
Thanks.
And go from there.
And there is a.
Go ahead.
There's a new new procedure for traffic control devices in the city of Kingston, where an older person or the mayor, I have to look and see whoever else can do it, but can bring this before the common council to have the engineer look at something. Because before, for instance, if somebody said somebody's going to get killed, we need a speed bump here, or we need to stop sign here, it would be the older people at Public Safety General Government who would decide that. But as of August, which is actually the same month that this design was approved by DOT, we've got a new resolution, the Common Council enacting this new policy, which makes these things, if they're complained about, they go before the engineer, and the engineer is required to look at the NACDO design guidelines, which actually talks about both of those things, coordinated signalizations and actuated versus automatic signals for pedestrians.
We wrote that.
What?
We wrote that.
You wrote the, yeah, you were instrumental in that, yep.
Right, this committee did, and submitted it to the council, so we're familiar with it. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it with the we can talk about it with the city engineer. We can talk about it with the. It doesn't change anything physically in the field. It's just a matter of whether actuation is used or timing is used. It doesn't affect the construction of the project, but the operation of the project after it's done is where that impact will, or what it would be effective. So we can continue that conversation.
Thanks.
But either way, either alternative can be accommodated in the project design. So, okay, good. Any other comments?
I just have one
Yes,
question. I walk a lot in the city because I live here and I share a car with my partner. We share one car, so a lot of times I have to walk. I walked here today. And in the winter, this winter, luckily we haven't had a lot of snow, but I've noticed as someone who's like literally walking from Rondout to Uptown sometimes to get somewhere, if there is a ton of snow, it's really hard to get to the push button because there's like a huge mound of snow. And I can get to it because I'm able-bodied and just climb over and push it. But someone who isn't wouldn't be able to. So I'm wondering, is there anything in the works to like make sure now that it will be solely push button to make sure that it's accessible? That like is DPW aware to like make sure that it's plowed out as a priority or something?
Yeah, the city ordinance for sidewalks requires the adjacent property owner to clear the snow.
Oh, okay.
And, which is an issue that we're dancing around and talking about later.
Yeah.
And how that can work better.
Yeah, totally. Almost like a hydrant thing where it's like you have to dig out your hydrant.
Right, and you have to clear your sidewalk, and you have to maintain and fix your sidewalk too,
Right.
Which is an interesting
Right.
issue. We can give you a whole rendition about that. That's 2 years old that we redid the ordinance.
Right.
But some of the legacy parts of the ordinance, which is common practice, is problematic.
Yeah.
But thanks, that's
Yeah.
This is the most packed
ever.
Complete Streets meeting we've ever had.
Somebody else might come.
I know.
Wow, that's it. 86.
Oh,
Dr.
yeah.
Hull
Oh,
called
yeah.
him this morning. He's working at the hospital today. He said he would try to come over.
Oh, all right. We'll find a place for them, don't worry. Okay. Review and approval of the minutes. Members, I assume, do you have any corrections to the minutes would be my first question. I've got 2 minor edits, which I'll give to Greg, which are just little typos. I don't think they're worthy of any. Have anything more than that? Does anybody else have any corrections, comments, thoughts? Can I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I'll make that motion.
Can I have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstainers? Okay, good, the minutes are accepted. Thank you, Greg, for doing that. Now, we've jumped the agenda, we put the Franklin Complete Streets presentation here so that Sean doesn't have to spend this whole evening with us, even though I know he would like to.
No, we won't. You're all there.
All right, so we'll turn it over to you, Sean, for the Franklin Street presentation.
Thank you. I'll give a quick, brief introduction and then hand it over to our consultants, the engineering firm MJ Engineering and Surveying from Clifton Park was selected through a competitive process to help the city design and inspect this project. So when the mayor was, running the first time around, he was, one of his platforms was some of the revitalization of Franklin Street, noticing that there were vacant properties that the city eventually took over from tax foreclosures. There was the lead water line replacement project that the city has recently undertaken. There's the relocation of our Office of Economic Development to Franklin Street. There's been some renovations done to the Hodge Center, some of the renovations done to the exterior of the library. And so this was just kind of part of fitting all that in to make Franklin Street a little bit more of an attractive and more user-friendly corridor for everybody in the city. Chris and the mayor wrote a grant application in 2016 for $750,000 to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to help fund half of this project. That was awarded in 2017. It took us a while to get under contract with the state for those funds. After we were awarded, we did a competitive proposal to hire an engineering firm to design the project for the city. MJ was hired last year and did the survey last year, and we're just now entering the preliminary design phase of the project. So we've had really one project advisory committee meeting so far with community members, business owners on the street, the library, property owners on Franklin Street to kind of get their interest. I'm coming here today with our consultants to kind of discuss the overarching concepts of the project and hear any concerns or things that you guys might think we should be taking into consideration as we're entering the design phase of this project, so that we can wrap that up into the whole report as we start to consider different alternatives for sidewalk and street improvements all along Franklin Street. So having said that, I'll hand this off to Lisa Wallen and Brian Cooper from MJ Engineering. They're on the phone here. And we see you guys on our screen here, so go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks everyone for having us.
We're looking forward to getting this project into design here. So you can see the screen, the title slide,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Yes, okay. There we go. So we just went through some introductions. This is just a quick agenda for the presentation today. We're going to go through a brief project overview and review the existing conditions that MJ has put together thus far. And then we have a more technical, typical section of an existing typical section of the street that we wanted to walk you through and talk about the specific items we're going to be looking at as we move into preliminary design. I just want to mention this is funded by a grant from the New York State DEC. It's a Climate Smart Communities grant. And I think as many of you are familiar with, there are requirements for that grant. Some of these key roles here, the sponsor is the City of Kingston. The administrator, again, is the Climate Smart Communities Office at DEC. MJ has been selected as a consultant, and part of the grant requirement is to form a project advisory committee. And we have worked with Sean to do that, and it's working out very well so far. We have various city staff members and community members. Our first meeting we held was more of a project kickoff meeting to talk about the project limits and our goals. And we've sort of held our second committee meeting last 2 weeks ago in the evening for the non-city staff members that have trouble attending during the day. And we talked about basically what we're going to go over today. For those who might not be very familiar with the project limits, we are talking about the entirety of Franklin Street from Wall Street on the western project limits out to Broadway to the east. And a few items of note, out on Wall Street, there's a senior housing complex and an elementary school. Those first 2 blocks of Franklin Street, at least on the north side, are part of the Fair Street Historic District. Paying attention to that and the requirements that come along with being in the historic district. Moving over to the east, to the right, we have the Kingston Library and the Hodge Community Center, excuse me. And we are aware of ongoing projects with Broadway. I know you were just discussing that earlier, and also an upcoming project on Franklin Street that's looking at pedestrian, Henry Street, looking at pedestrian and bike access as well. Just a recap of a few of the project objectives that we've set moving forward with this project. We're looking to create a safe and accessible route along Franklin Street for all modes of transportation, but we want to also make sure that it's meeting the resident and commuter needs for this corridor. It's a very tight-knit community we've come to learn through through the committee meetings, and Sean's been speaking with some people in the street. We want to enhance the aesthetic qualities of the street while providing an inviting connection between points of interest in the community. One specific, very interesting thing that's been brought to our attention is the school, the Washington School, has a walking school bus between the school and the community center every day. So I think you all know there's a lot of foot traffic on this street that would appreciate the project. And lastly, we do want to maintain and improve upon the historic district features and features that are contributing to that historic district. And we also, like I said, we want to have some level of consistency between the Broadway and Henry Street project.
Can I ask a question?
Looking at an existing conditions section.
Can we interrupt for questions?
Sure.
Or wait till to the end?
Lisa, if you don't mind, hold on. I mean, it's your meeting, Bob. I'll let you entertain however you want.
Quick answer, if you could. Of all the streets in Kingston you could have picked, I know there's Broadway and Clinton Avenue, but you have a lot of cross streets going from one to another. Why did you pick Franklin?
I don't know. Kristen might know.
We picked Franklin because of the foot traffic between the school and the Hodge Center
It's got,
and the.
it's got a number of pedestrian generators on it.
Yeah, it has a
Okay.
lot
So,
of
you know, the library, the Hodge Center,
Yeah.
so it would make sense to do
But
that.
that's a good question in general, like how are we choosing these projects? And one of the things that we're doing is a pedestrian and bicycle master plan. We also got a similar grant to do that, which would also include an ADA transition plan. That's something that's required by the federal government. And so once we have that pedestrian and bicycle plan, we'll have a better way to prioritize the streets that we choose for grant projects or, you know, any sort of thing like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Okay. Sorry, okay, go ahead.
No problem. I actually meant to say, this feels like a very formal presentation, but if anyone has any comments that chime in, please give them. This slide here, we've documented the existing conditions with a survey and done some research to identify the existing city right-of-way boundaries. I'm not sure how big it looks on your screen. The picture below is the actual deeded width of the street. It's a 50-foot right-of-way for Franklin Street. So the project is not, the intent is to not have any property acquisition, so we're kind of bound between that 50 feet. And today, within that 50 feet, on either side, there are existing sidewalks. There's, if you can see the green in between the sidewalk and the curb, there's a buffer strip there. There is two-way travel and parking permitted on both sides of the street today. In both locations, there's just a few small areas where parking is prohibited. And then on the far side, again, another sidewalk. Most of the time, the street trees are between the sidewalk and the curb today. Taking that nice empty section, and when we fill it up, this is more what it would look like. The sidewalk design standards today have a 5-foot minimum for a sidewalk, and these range between 4 and 5 feet. The grass utility strip ranges between 1 and 4 feet. The parking lane, like I said, there's parking lanes on both sides. A bare minimum for a parking lane is 7 foot. We would tend to, when we're designing things, we would try not to go less than 8 feet. But considering 2 7-foot parking lanes, we're left with about 13.5 feet left for a two-way travel. Standard for this type of street is a 10-foot travel lane. So you can see there's a lot happening here. People through traffic need to pull over sometimes to let opposing traffic by, that sort of thing. Okay. So at this point, we're looking at developing some preliminary design concepts, and that's what our goal is for this second project advisory committee meeting, is to gather input and see what people are interested in having us look at. We're assuming that the typical section does vary, the existing typical section, the width of the road does vary. I can go backwards here. This particular, well, it says here, 27.5 feet to 30 feet wide, curb to curb. So we may come up with a couple of sections that it doesn't mean that one section would be carried through the entire corridor. But we do want to create a consistent corridor. And Sean, can you see the green numbers on your screen?
Yes, we can see those.
Okay. So I just wanted to walk through a few of the ideas that have been thrown out so far. And I'll just go in order then. And the first one is the sidewalk. We are looking to reconstruct the sidewalks at a standard 5-foot width at least, if possible. The number 2 is the buffer strip. The buffer strip, also known as a snow storage strip. There's a lot of things happening there. Again, snow storage. There are some large, some small street trees existing within that buffer strip. That's where residents are often putting their garbage cans. Just some observations so far. I kind of already touched on the parking lanes. Number 3 are narrow, and on the next, I think, coming up on the next couple of slides, we are looking at a parking study to assess the utilization of parking on the street today. The travel lanes, we're looking at whether the existing condition is sufficient, or if we want to make changes to convert those to more standard width. And then on the far side, 6, 7, and 8 is kind of a mirror image of the first one. Other things we're looking at are traffic calming considerations. Some examples of that that we've seen throughout the state here. Raised crosswalks up in the upper image there. The second is curb extensions, or sometimes called curb bump outs at the intersections. That's going to reduce the length that a pedestrian is in the active travel way. And the third potential option is a raised or a table intersection, where instead of just a crosswalk being raised, the entire intersection could be raised. Moving on to the parking study is already underway. We created these data collection sheets, and Sean has been helping with this to and from work at certain times a day. We're just documenting the number of cars on the street, and he's done a great job at varying the times of day and days of week. We're going to keep this effort up so that we have a good amount of data to present. So far though, the general observation is that parking is very underutilized for Franklin Street. I know there's a lot of numbers, but the third column, available spaces, you can see we estimated the number of available spaces. There's no pricing or anything on the street, but based on parallel parking length, we estimated. And you can see the numbers are fairly low there. And then moving on, our next steps for this project are to identify a few concept options to progress and create plans for, and hopefully we can progress 2 of those and provide them to the project advisory committee for review and input prior to scheduling a public meeting. At the public meeting, we'll present them and gather input from additional members of the public. Concurrently with that, we'll start looking at the seeker process.
Can I ask you a question? Have you done any crash data, crash information?
Yes.
We have done a crash analysis. The results are, there's nothing eye-opening, I'll say. The crash rates are lower than the statewide averages for similar urban streets like this. But a lot of them, I suppose, related is that there are a lot of accidents with parked cars, probably because people are trying to get around them to allow opposing traffic by.
Have you done any speed work?
There were no.
Any speed studies?
We have not, no.
Okay.
We can check.
Lisa, can you back the slide up to the existing conditions cross-section? So, I mentioned to this group earlier, we've taken some of these design concepts to our project advisory committee meeting. We've talked to the community about things that they're interested in or not interested in having in this corridor. I figured we would come to the Complete Streets Advisory Council to get your guys' opinion on this corridor in this area, knowing that you're more familiar with the concepts of shared use paths, bike lanes, one-way streets, and removing parking from certain sides. We could go through slides and take 2 hours on it. But again, I know that you are all familiar with these design concepts and not wanting to take all your time. I figured I would leave it a little bit more broad. We can look at it here and kind of get input on what your guys' take on the use of shared use path, bike lanes, two-way bike path, the potential for moving parking or making Franklin a one-way street, and those kind of ideas. Those are the things we discussed with the project advisory committee at the last meeting to get their input.
I know Franklin Street pretty well. I'm on it a lot. You've got a lot of, some areas you can get away with doing alternate side parking, maybe not having parking on both sides all the time. But, because most of those houses do have driveways, there's not a lot of them that don't have on-street. Some of them have no off-street parking, but that would be your biggest look, to me, that would be probably the biggest consideration without hearing everybody up in arms taking it away completely. Because, you know, from Broadway in past the library, it's not that much. You've got the Hodge Center, you're gonna have Radio Kingston, they've got that parking lot across the street. Mount Zion, the Zion Church parking lot, so that's not a big issue. It's a little bit further down, like after Clinton, that it might get congested and weird. That's my 2 cents for parking anyway.
And the idea with removing parking is really if the community and people in different groups thought that we need to do something creative on Franklin Street. You know, that's the only way we gain any sort of right-of-way or area to use within our own right-of-way to do anything like a bike lane. Again, you see how narrow the street is right now with 27.5 feet of asphalt. But we're not saying that something has to happen here. You know, we can leave a lot of the conditions the way they are and redo the sidewalks on Franklin Street without changing parking or traffic flow. It's just that's, if we were to want to do anything creative, parking would have to be taken out.
You know, I worry about increasing operating speed by removing
Yeah,
parking.
absolutely. I mean, Franklin Street works a certain way right now. The fact that it's so tight and narrow certainly controls traffic speed.
I would just mention, I hope your consultants have been made aware of the signalization study that our office has conducted. We did take a detailed look at the traffic warrants at Franklin and Clinton, and that signal that's currently in default blink does not meet the warrants. It can safely be removed and replaced with a 4-way stop at that intersection. And I would recommend, well, I can't really make any recommendations, but I would really love to see a raised crosswalk and sort of a neck down approach at that intersection to see some bump outs. I think that can really continue to help calm the traffic and give pedestrians a better sense of safety and crossing in that area. And I think that's a great location to do it. If a raised crosswalk is just not tenable for whatever reason, painted bump outs, and if potentially curb extensions with bump outs would be my preference, and then a painted bump out.
Do you have any problems with emergency equipment when you have a raised crosswalk here? I would think that that would be an issue. I would think that possibly snow plowing with a raised crosswalk would be an issue. And also my concern about bump outs, I'm not sure, and I know I'm new to this, what your street sweeping is, but it's a bear on street sweeping, so has any of that been considered?
Certainly, and we have a meeting, you know, with our Department of Public Works to discuss those kinds of things. We've talked to landowners that live on the street about their concerns. You know, I came to you guys, you know, to get your, you know, personal, professional take on things. But those are absolutely concerns that our Public Works Department has expressed in the past on these types of projects.
Well, I would think the police and fire would also have a concern too if you have a raised crosswalk.
Sure.
We do have two raised crosswalks now.
3.
3?
Yeah, on Delaware too.
Yeah, so we put in a few last year, and we haven't, I haven't heard a lot of complaints about them. There's one that's on Delaware where the rail trail crosses, and then one on Hasbrook, and one on another one on Delaware near.
It's just a consideration.
They're nice and wide at least, though. They're not like small speed bumps. So those are nice wide crosswalks, so it's a lot easier to transition.
It's just making sure that because it is an issue.
Absolutely.
And it's definitely something that I know in some places, response times, you know, they start to get a little bit concerned if there are too many of them, you know.
What did the residents say?
Residents were really interested in trees. Was probably the biggest thing we heard as far as the importance along the corridor. And a lot of the status quo, honestly. I haven't compiled all the meeting, minutes into a document just yet. We were waiting to get some input here and talk to city staff regarding the project as well, and kind of compile all that into some sort of informing document. But essentially, a lot of the residents are concerned about the upkeep with bluestone on the street.
Is that going to be the proposal, bluestone the whole length?
No, that's not it, at least in the proposal. The way the grant was written was to install 5 foot of concrete that's not in the historic district.
But there's historic district.
You're in the historic district requirement.
Yeah. So some of it would, at least,
Right.
would be required by city code
Right.
to do bluestone within the historic district.
Time for a question. So does that mean that all of the historic bluestone along Franklin that's not in the historic district would be removed?
Potentially, we don't have a design or anything right now.
Now's the time to
One
talk
of the
about it. That's why they're talking to us now.
Yeah.
And it is historic,
That's what.
and it goes to Clinton Street. It goes beyond a block or two from the historic district, and it's the same stuff in the historic district. On both sides of the
Yeah, there's
street.
bluestone all the way to
Right.
Broadway. It's a patchwork
Right.
of asphalt, concrete. You know.
Right.
Just to say, there are definitely residents that care about preserving
Right.
historic.
No, we know that, yeah.
What, you mentioned underutilized parking. Was that done only during the day, or did they do that in the evening when cars come home?
Generally, I think the times are on there, but you could see sometimes 10 in the morning, 8:30 in the morning, 7 at night, 6:48. So some of those days are weekends, weekdays.
Okay.
I took pictures as well. I know some people probably wouldn't believe that there was single-digit cars along the entire corridor in the middle of the night. But
Just checking.
yeah.
Could you tell me again what the amount of money has been secured thus far and what the local match is?
Sure, it's a $750,000 of grant funds, and that has to be matched with $750,000
Right.
local funds.
So $1.5 million.
I also
How much do you have for construction?
I just had another thought on the question around why did we choose this project. A lot of the projects that we choose, it's a combination of community needs or identified community needs, interest from the mayor or other city staff, but also a lot of what goes into what projects we choose are what the grants are for. And this is for climate. It's a climate smart communities grant. It's about improving pedestrian access in neighborhoods that connect what we might call everyday destinations like schools, libraries, streets. And so one of the reasons we chose Franklin is that it has those it has 4 of those everyday destinations: the library, the Hodge, the connection to the Broadway corridor, and a connection to school. So that's another thing that comes into the decisions that are made for grant applications. You can't just choose any street all over the city. You have to choose the streets that fit the grant obligations or guidelines.
Only with CBGB, with community block grant money, does it have to be within a certain economic zone, correct?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the CDBG.
Right, but I mean, that's
grant,
really the
but-
only time you have, when you're really looking at economic makeup of the area as well.
Yeah, but it depends. I mean, some grants, some of this other state grants or DOT grants, are saying that we want you to work in low income areas. It really,
Depends on the grant.
changes from grant to grant, changes from year to year, so.
What's our traffic volume on this road? Lisa or anyone?
Question?
Offhand, we don't have that number, but we can find that out for you.
Thank you.
I assume that we're not changing the curbs and the pavement, this is strictly on the
That's-
sidewalks.
Yeah, presently we're looking at keeping the curbs where they are for budgetary reasons.
Would the curbs also remain, the existing curbs, or would those be replaced?
We'd like to replace them. I think we don't preferably with like a stone curb.
So
It is a stone curb,
I
is
just
it not
wanted to say
bluestone?
something about that,
Oh,
because
is
I
it?
think it's not something that I understood until I really got into this, and many people might not understand, when you move a curb,
big
it
deal.
means you're moving drainage. It becomes extremely expensive very quickly, and so that is a limitation for design.
That was my next question, is with you doing all of this, what kind of stormwater management do you have to do and change? Not much if you're not moving the curb, right?
Will this be done in conjunction with repaving the street?
That would certainly be looked into after, this would be done before that, but there's no commitment to that. It's certainly something we're talking about.
A lot of the curb is historic bluestone too as well.
And the other issue is that there are intersecting streets that have bluestone sidewalk historic, and there are some huge slabs that hit the sidewalk. So the question is, if you're going to replace that sidewalk, what happens to the adjoining infrastructure?
Another underlying theme, of course, is you're going to have to make it compatible or consistent with the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Absolutely.
That's not optional.
What about, Sauger's got a waiver, right?
They got some waiver on historic stuff. I don't know if they got a waiver on ADA. Really?
You can get some
That's what the press said anyway.
adjustments in width for short stretches, but you don't get a waiver.
But from the ADA.
I mean, it makes some details. I've never seen anybody
waivers.
Yeah.
get a pass on it.
I'll look it up and get it.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah, I mean, you might be able to go to 4 foot or something like that, but I've never seen or heard of anything of getting a waiver on the inches or tripping hazards or anything like that. Which
I would say that I would be very much against that, and that could cause another uproar.
Can I ask a quick question? What about resetting the bluestone? Because it's much easier over the years, you're able actually to keep a lot of trees that you wouldn't be able to keep if you had concrete. If you got bluestone, because you can reset bluestone, concrete has to be totally redone. So in a way, bluestone is better for ADA compliance in the long run.
It's slippery. It's very slippery.
slippery, the joints are hard to keep straight. Bluestone is hard to keep consistent with the requirements of the American Disabilities Act.
It heaves, you've got cold, you've got, temperature changes. It's not the best.
Now, if you can go back to the olden days and use the bluestone that was here when the city was constructed, that was 8 inches thick and huge pieces, that's different than what you can buy today. The problem is you can't buy that bluestone today.
But
so
we have a lot of it. The city will wind up harvesting quite a bit of it.
Right.
And there's still quite a bit of it that is in beautiful condition, that is big and large and
should be reused, absolutely.
And sections that are there that are thick and big and just need to be reset in order to stay there.
And there's also a great deal of heaved cement.
Right.
Right. Well, there's also a spec that can be used to set existing slabs of bluestone in cement that addresses a lot of these concerns. But that issue is expensive, and it probably would blow up the budget pretty quickly. But it could be done in patches, in segments, potentially.
Something that was talked about at the last project advisory committee was to try to come up with a way to use bluestone throughout the corridor in some sort of decorative motif along the entire length, so that we're still seeing.
And not necessarily in the trout.
Yeah, not necessarily as a sidewalk material.
But one thing I do want to say about Franklin that you may know is that when you talk about the historic district, a lot of the city, the bluestone is fragmented, or there's like asphalt, and there is a stretch that goes from, I think, Wall Street, so we just walked it, to Clinton that's pretty much intact. And you don't see that everywhere, and it is old bluestone, and because the street is level, I mean, there's not dramatic upheaval. There is gaps, but it's not, it seems like it's pretty navigable compared to other places. And this is just, when it's gone forever.
Right. If
it's part of history.
Right. If the material is there is a to reset bluestone. I mean, it can be reset.
And it's intersected with these cross streets. I mean, it's a whole infrastructure with the curves. So the idea that you would be putting cement in there, I think it could really compromise the look and feel of the city. I understand the safety concerns, and it's complicated and expensive, but I would just say that it would be nice if it was seriously considered, because it is part of our history.
Yeah, the sidewalk ordinance requires it in the historic district.
I know that.
And, you know, and it encourages its use, I guess, when it's appropriate.
Well,
when
there's
it
a
can be
Woodstock
done.
survey in 2013 that really suggested preserving it everywhere in the city.
Right. Which
Maybe that's too
Right.
much, but
Right.
those streets in Midtown are flat and they're pretty level.
Right.
And it's not in bad shape, a lot of it.
Do we have an assessment of the condition of existing trees on the street?
Yes.
By an arborist or the tree commission?
The city did a tree study 2 years ago, and actually as part of the survey for this project, they did a tree survey.
Will there be recommendations to retain the healthiest trees? I imagine some may be sickly.
Yeah.
I'm just generally speaking based on what I observed throughout the city. So some will probably come down, but I'm hoping that some can also be retained throughout the
And the ones that come down, are you planning on replanting them, and what is the type of tree you're specifying for replanting?
We would go to the tree commission for recommendations on species to be planted in the area. And, you know, based on the input we gather, which I assume is going to be very pro-tree in this corridor, we would absolutely, you know, the tree planting is within the acceptable cost of the funding source, city funds.
Are the trees maintained by the city, or are they maintained by the property?
The code specifies that property owners.
And if the property owner doesn't want a tree, because they don't want to maintain it?
They go to the tree commission, right?
Well, maintaining is, I mean, the property owner is responsible.
For leaf removal?
Sidewalk.
Yeah, for cleaning the
after
sidewalk and stuff that they're responsible for anyway, but they're not responsible for like pruning or
Okay,
anything
all right,
like that.
okay.
I'm not sure
Uh,
about
Yeah.
that.
Well, they have, I mean,
I'm just
they
curious
go to the
because
tree
there
commission when
are
something
times
needs
when
to be
people will
done.
say, I don't want that tree.
Commission, that's a street tree.
I mean, if a tree dies, you know, they need a permit to remove it.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
But
I mean-
Sarah, if the tree is not dead and a property owner wants to remove the tree, what does the
They
tree
have,
commission
they,
say?
it depends on the condition of the tree.
But if it's healthy, you would
Usually we
probably
say no.
Say
If
no,
there's,
right?
if
I mean, they
there's
are
no,
sort of
if there's no, if it's not,
But half the time, they don't even come to the city. with it.
well, they're supposed to. And we've had
Supposed to.
situations where they'll get fined or told they have to replant.
Yeah.
No, if the house isn't, if it's not gonna damage their house or it's not, there aren't branches falling down, then we'll say no.
What if it's gonna damage the sidewalk?
We try, when we can, to suggest they repair the sidewalk, which is
Does-
also
does
their
the
responsibility as property
You mean
owners.
like up and
For a
over?
tree that's not theirs?
It is,
Well,
well, it
because
is, you know, it's
you're-
public-private, you
well,
know, this is,
I'm
that's
I'm
the
sure
way
you'll get
street
some
trees
push,
are.
I'm sure you'll get some pushback.
That is how
Yeah.
it's been in the city for a long
Yeah.
time, and I know that
And sometimes the tree
this
survives.
council has been looking at making recommendations on
Fine.
how the sidewalk and the trees and everything else is getting maintained anyway.
I would say in this project, we will absolutely try to maintain any existing trees that are there, but knowing that we don't have a lot of right of way to work with in the area, and, you know, we're not planning on having to acquire any right of way as they discussed. So in order to get around one of these trees would probably mean getting some sort of easement or property from private landowners to have a sidewalk jog around the tree, and that process can potentially add a lot of time.
And your buildings are pretty close.
Yeah, and you know, and the house can be in the way of them.
However, we're talking about the
other-
trees that are in that well between the sidewalk and the curb anyway, those are the only ones that are street trees. The others are property owners' trees.
But there are some big shade trees on that street in those wells, and it would be terrible if you were to take them away.
Well, it's my opinion, I don't live in the town, but I know in Woodstock, we have an ordinance about trees, and I would think that whatever ordinance you has that makes a property owner replace a tree or says, no, you can't take it down, I would think your same ordinance would be for this project. If a property owner can't take down a tree without permission, I would think this project.
Property can't take down a city tree without permission, but this always drove, even when I was on the council, it drove me crazy. A beautiful heritage tree, they could take it down if it's on their property and they don't want it, and it is gorgeous sugar maple that has been there for 100 years and they don't want it, it's gone. No consequence. drives me crazy.
That's why we need a tree ordinance.
Is there just a stated objective that old shade trees on D Street or a city street are a good thing we'd like to maintain?
Yeah, and that's what the project criteria, you're looking at that. You want to maintain all the trees that you can in that.
Right.
So,
But those,
you know, it's not,
those are the city street trees,
Right.
again, it's not
Right.
a
It's
private
not a private
property.
tree.
Right.
I always felt if it were a certain circumference, you should go and be able to have to ask permission to cut it down. But not.
Don't we have a tree topic at the end of?
right.
I know that we have, we're gonna get into like general
Right,
tree.
and it's approaching
issues.
4 o'clock, so how are you guys?
Yeah.
You guys, have you heard
Do
some?
you have any other, maybe specific questions for the consultants, because they're on the line here?
Well, I have
too.
2 questions. Can we get a copy of this presentation somehow?
Absolutely.
Okay, and that would be one, or put it online somehow so we can take a look at it. And I assume that if we come up with other great ideas, you can send them to Sean and you can transmit them to the consultants.
Absolutely.
To consider as it goes forward.
And I imagine we'll be back with more details, in the future. Again, I wanted to approach you guys at this time.
Oh, it's a good thing, right.
We're
It's
coming
the right
up.
time to be talking.
Yeah.
And, there will be a public meeting, right?
Absolutely.
And other things where
Yeah,
then more fleshed out alternatives will be shared at that time.
When we start talking about specific impacts to individual properties, we'll have a set of plans that we're proposing at that time that we can show the public. We don't have anything of that nature yet.
No, Henry's.
Good. All right, thank you, good. Anything else, any other last things, should we move on?
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for the presentation, yeah, very good.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you guys.
Alright, Sean, I'm gonna crash out of this, so you're probably gonna lose your screen.
All right,
Okay.
Lisa.
My meter's running out, so I'm gonna
Okay,
go.
bye.
But thank you, that was excellent, thank you.
All right, let's move into old business. New members, Complete Streets Advisory Commission, Council appointments and applications. I don't know of any new members aside from Claudette. Welcome.
We have a guest.
You
who
thought
may be
about it, huh?
interested.
He's been working on you?
I have some stake in this deal. I'm Wesley Hill. I'm the medical director in the Kingston Family Health Center, Kingston Family Health.
Welcome.
We are opening a medical practice in Pine Street.
Okay.
So this will be close to where my operation will be.
Yeah.
And this actually protocol to my existing office also.
Mhm.
Our patients can get access to
Mhm.
healthcare. So I'm just observing and see
Okay.
what I can get involved.
Well, if you're right, if you have a moment of weakness and choose to join, you're certainly welcome. We'll fill you in on the process if you want to. Thanks.
I'm sorry, did Claudette introduce herself before I arrived?
Well, for those that got here on time, yes.
Okay.
And I'll do it again for you privately if you want.
Kristen Wilson, Claudette Ford.
I know you have a really interesting background, so I'm excited that you're joining this council.
Yeah, bringing back memories.
Or nightmares.
Or nightmares.
Either way, once you're in the club, you can't get away. Project update discussions, I assume, or hope that everybody took a look at the website, and I'm sure it's been kept up to date, or close, maybe. There's a couple we can ask about, and if you have other questions, we can ask Kristen because she's here. We're going to award the Broadway project, I'm told.
Yeah, we are awarding the Broadway project. The council voted on it, right, last Tuesday? Voted to award the project and secure the bond funding for it. We have to wait for New York State DOT approval.
Right.
So we haven't awarded it yet,
Right.
but we are awarding it. Construction will probably start in March. Well, it has to start in March, and we don't have a schedule from the contractor yet.
Right.
But John Schulteis in the engineering, the city engineer, will be managing the construction project, along with, there will be 3 construction inspectors from GPI who will be doing all the fancy construction inspection that needs to happen.
Which is mostly paperwork.
Mostly paperwork, a lot of New York
Right.
State DOT requirements, and
Right.
and then I'll be involved on the back end with communications and finances. So
It'll be painful, but it'll be wonderful when it's done.
Yeah.
You'll see this, and you'll like it.
Yeah, so
That's good
a
news.
major update.
I just thought I'd mention also, Ulster County Department of the Environment will be flying the corridor with the county's drone to do a pre and post imagery and videos, mostly for posterity and historic reference, but it'll have some other valuable applications, I'm sure. We've already flown around area of the I-587, Colonel Chandler area. We did that last week.
Okay.
And so we'll do that at regular increments throughout the project. Should be pretty interesting.
Very cool. To post them somewhere so people can see.
Yeah, we'll try to get them up.
I don't know if there's any other big project issues you want to talk about?
Just that the other projects that are getting constructed this year are I-587. I think folks have heard about that. It's already underway. The DOT has their engineering office right there at the intersection, or their construction group is right there. So they're getting started. And so there's going to be a lot of activity there in the next month or so. Well, next 2 years, really. The idea is that traffic will be maintained through both projects throughout the construction. So, but it's probably going to be slower.
Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe not. Right. Somebody said to me today,
actually
traffic might move faster
well,
through the I-587 intersection.
At the public meeting, I stopped at the public meeting, and the designer says he suspects that it will operate much better than the temporary construction will operate much better than what's there now.
Yeah. Hopefully it'll operate better.
Mark Crook. And when he's done, it'll operate.
Result will operate
and when
better.
he's done, it'll operate just as well. How's that? So.
And there's also the Empire State Trail project, which is working on sidewalks on Route 32 south of Stewart's and the South Wall Street intersection, and also includes work on Greenkill Avenue. I heard a rumor this morning that it was awarded, and so that's going to get started in March too. So we have a lot of construction going on.
Construction is good. We like construction.
Nickname us the Orange Cone City.
Right.
But that's a progress.
Streetlight updates. They did my street. So they're going through and how you doing? Sure, you can tell us about that.
Sure. They've done about 1,500 streetlights in the last maybe 6 weeks. So they're just about done with every Cobra head style light on a wooden Central Hudson pole in the city. They'll likely take a little break for the next month or so, and then come back and do the decorative lights in the uptown and downtown districts.
Okay, should we all complain about the color of the light? No, it's fine.
The color, I think, partly because citizens ended up becoming below a certain Kelvin, because the first round of the DPW buying replacement lights, when they were just replacing them as they were going out, were like 500 Kelvin. So it was only when the citizens said wait that they ended up deciding that they'll be below 300.
No,
the city did follow the American Medical Association guidelines of 3,000 Kelvin
good
for the color temperature.
That looks good. That looks good. NACDO, Complete Streets Design Standards. A couple things about NACDO, and I want to talk a little bit about that. The National Association of City Transportation Officials is a group that was formed in 90, I made some notes here, in response to 96. A guy named Lee Sander, who used to work at the Department of Transportation, actually, I know with me for years ago. In 1996, when he was working in New York City, and they formed NACDO as a result, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, as a reaction to AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. Now, AASHTO was formed in 1915. It's a collaboration of all the states to set a series of standards for highways and now transportation. It's highway focused. It is the parent of the notorious Green Book, which was the AASHTO standards. And in fact, in the 1993 issue of the Green Book, my name is there. So be careful. AASHTO AASHTO was the Standing Committee on Highways has a subcommittee on design that set those standards. And those standards were applicable to all states. And they had to be agreed upon by all states. So the issue around the AASHTO standards, which is a legitimate issue, is that the same standard for Iowa is not the same standard that works well in New York City. And so there was always a disconnect between state highways, interstates. Interstates are consistent all over, and they should be. State highways, not so much. Cities, definitely not. So in 1996, they decided that they should form a group of cities, city organizations, to come up with city standards. And that's what NACTO is. And NACTO has a set of standards that are good. They cover all the stuff that we need to think about as a small city, and are in place and are defendable. You can say, I follow the NACTO standards, I didn't just make this up. So it really makes sense to follow them.